Hi, my name's Chase Kriens, and I like politics. Been interested in politics for the past few years, and whenever I can, I like to have political discussions with people. And while I understand politics can be a bit dry at times, personally, I very much enjoy it. But during these discussions which I have with people, usually they'll point out that a lot of my ideas are very radical. And while I can understand this is true of certain ideas, with others, it's not true at all. Take, for instance, healthcare. I personally believe in the Medicare for all single-payer option for the United States. And the person that I'm talking to might say this idea is radical. Well, actually, 53% of Americans support Medicare for all, despite what, the mass media and, conservatives would have you believe. And in doing this presentation, this talk, I hope I can inform you on the reasons why ideas are often seen as radical in the United States, and one of the most important ideas in politics, which is the Overton Window. But what is the Overton Window? Well, the Overton Window is a way that we can describe how left-leaning or right-leaning ideas and how socially acceptable it is as well. When discussing American political parties with the average person, and if you asked to draw where each of them stand ideologically, they would probably place them as the Democratic Party being the center-left party, the Republican Party being the center-right party, with extreme ideologies like communism and fascism being on the far left and far right. The one thing which is unique about the Overton Window is the box in the middle, which represents the ideologies which are deemed acceptable, while anything outside the box is deemed radical. The problem is that in the United States, our center is skewed heavily towards the right when compared to other countries. The Democratic Party is actually a center-right party, and the Republicans more resemble a right-wing or far-right-wing party when comparing it to other countries. People like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are often seen as radical socialists in America, when in reality, in other countries, they would be seen as very much center-left, with many of their ideas going under the ideology of social democracy, which is what most center-left parties follow in other countries. The Democratic Party's ideology, though, is not social democracy. It is instead one of neoliberalism, which is the belief that the free market and capitalism are good, some social welfare programs mixed in would make things better for the average person. But in a country like the United Kingdom, for instance, these views don't reflect the center-left Labour Party. They actually more instead reflect the center Liberal Democrats. But in order to understand how these parties function in America right now, it's important to look at the history of how they got to be this way. The Democratic Party almost became a social democratic party. Under FDR, the nation saw huge social welfare changes, which was considered to be unprecedented at the time. This was the first major movement of the Overton Window. It moved considerably to the left at the time. In fact, the moderate Republicans at the time more closely resemble the Democrats of today than the Republican Party is right now. But after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, the Republicans began to skew more towards the right, and the Democrats began to lead slightly more leftwards. This was mostly seen in the election of 1964, where the Republicans decided to nominate Barry Goldwater, who was the senator of Arizona at the time, instead of Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York and later vice president. Goldwater was very radical and wanted to repeal the recently passed Civil Rights Act of the time, and this ultimately led to his defeat to Lyndon B. Johnson, where he ended up losing in a massive landslide. But Goldwater did very well in the South, an area which had been consistently won by Democrats since the 1800s, and this led to the party switch in the United States. This showed the power of the Overton Window, as a candidate who reached greatly outside of it failed miserably. Many Democrats at the time, who were known as Dixiecrats, began to change their party affiliation at this time to Republicans. And one of these Democrats who decided to switch their party affiliation was Ronald Reagan. Reagan was considered to be a radical when he ran in 1980, but due to many factors, including the fact that the incumbent, Jimmy Carter, was deeply unpopular, led to his overwhelming success in that election. Reagan's radical ideas pushed the Overton Window far to the right, as he began to dismantle many of the welfare programs which FDR had set up during his time in office.
It's now common knowledge that our welfare system has itself become a poverty trap.
Reagan's influence on the Democratic Party was huge, and in 1992 they decided to nominate a moderate and more conservative-leaning Democrat than they had done in the past, and that nominee's name was Bill Clinton. When Clinton was elected, instead of ending many of Reagan's programs to end the welfare state, he continued them in his crusade against the welfare state.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I pledged to end welfare as we know it. I have worked very hard for 4 years to do just that.
Clinton was very successful in continuing these reforms under his administration, which skewed the Overton window even more towards the right, as now the Democrats began adopting Clinton's policy of welfare reform. After Clinton's 8 years in office, Bush Jr. and Obama were both elected afterwards. I'm going to gloss over these two presidents a little bit, mostly because they were both deemed to be very moderate. Although under Obama's administration came the legalization of same-sex marriage, which was definitely very good for the Overton window, as that idea became very radical to completely normalized, and now most people don't think of it as much of a radical idea as it was 20 years ago. But in 2016, with the election of Donald Trump, saw another shift with the Overton window. And while the long-term effects of Trump's presidency haven't set in, the short-term effects on issues like abortion, education, and racism have already become apparent. But I would make the argument that Trump wasn't as successful as Reagan in pushing the Overton window rightwards, as many of his ideas were never mainstream, never became normalized, and as a result were very controversial. What we see in the modern political Overton window is two parties which have moved so far to the right that our center is now center-right. But there is still a chance we might be able to reverse this, as ideas like Medicare for all and free college have become more popular over time. And if Democrats manage to nominate someone who is slightly more radical in their next presidential election, we might be able to see the Overton window move leftwards once more. Because what keeps the Overton window right-leaning isn't just the Republicans, it's the Democrats as well, who have continued to nominate moderates who don't push the Overton window at all. When MLK fought for civil rights, he didn't take the moderate route, he took the more radical route, stating that, quote,
"First, I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice."
Because while it may seem like progressives, such as AOC, are part of a small group, this group is increasingly becoming bigger, and with your help, we can make the Democratic Party move leftwards and become the party of progressive values once more. Outside of that, one of the best tools which you can use is educating yourself and others about these shifts. I was not aware of the effects that the Overton window had on American politics until I delved into the political ideologies of other center-left-leaning parties across the world. And by educating others about these shifts and how other parties consider to be normal, we can help end this trend of the center being center-right. Thank you.